The first message arrived while I was sitting alone in my car, staring at a hospital bill I knew I could not afford. It was only 6 words, but they would change everything I thought I knew about strangers, loneliness, and the fragile ways people can save one another. The message said, "Please come. I have no one else." I almost deleted it because I knew the number was not saved in my phone. I almost convinced myself it was somebody's mistake. Instead, I typed one question back, and by the end of that day, I would be standing beside a frightened woman whose life was falling apart. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel so our family can continue bringing stories that remind us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life. My name is Everett Cole, and at 43, I had become very good at pretending I was fine. I owned a small repair shop on the edge of a quiet Pennsylvania town, lived in a modest apartment above the shop, and spent most of my days fixing things other people had given up on. Broken lawn equipment, old radios, battered bicycles, appliances that seemed destined for the trash. I liked repairing things because they never asked why they had been abandoned. They simply waited for someone to believe they were worth fixing. Maybe that was why I had trouble repairing my own life. 3 years earlier, my younger brother, Nathaniel, had died after a long illness. We had been close once, but an argument over our father's estate had separated us during the final year of his life. By the time I realized how foolish our anger had been, there was no apology left to give. Nathaniel was gone, and I had carried that regret like a stone inside my chest ever since. That afternoon, I had just received another medical bill connected to my mother's old care. I had spent nearly everything I had helping her during her final months, and now the debt was threatening to swallow my business. I sat behind the steering wheel, exhausted, wondering whether closing the shop would be the final failure in a life already filled with too many unfinished things. That was when my phone vibrated. The message was from an unfamiliar number. "Please come. I have no one else." I stared at it for several seconds. My first thought was that someone had typed the wrong number. I wrote back asking who they were. The reply came quickly. The person said their name was Clara Whitmore and that she was sorry, but she desperately needed help. She gave me an address about 15 minutes away and said there was something important I needed to see. I should have ignored it. Every sensible instinct told me to stay out of a stranger's problem. But there was something about the words "I have no one else" that stayed with me. I knew what loneliness sounded like. I knew what it felt like when you looked around and realized there was nobody you trusted enough to call. So I drove there. The address belonged to a small, aging house with peeling white paint and an overgrown garden. The front door opened before I even knocked, and Clara stood there holding the frame as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. She looked to be in her late 30s, with tired blue eyes and trembling hands. She seemed surprised to see me, almost as surprised as I was to be standing there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at my phone and realized what had happened. She had intended to text someone else. The apology came immediately. She said she had been trying to reach her mother's former neighbor, a man who had promised to help her, but she had entered one wrong digit. Somehow, that wrong digit had brought me to her doorstep. I told her I understood and turned to leave. Then I heard a faint sound from inside the house. A child crying. I stopped. Clara closed her eyes as if she had been trying desperately to hide that sound from the world. She finally admitted that her 8-year-old daughter, Elsie, had been sick for several days. Clara had lost her job after missing too many shifts while caring for her. Her landlord had given her a final warning, and she had no family nearby. The man she thought she was texting had promised to help but had stopped answering her calls. She hadn't known where else to turn. I asked if the child needed medical attention. Clara nodded, and something inside me shifted. I drove them to a nearby clinic and waited with them for hours. The doctor said Elsie was dehydrated and needed medication, rest, and proper food. She would recover, but Clara had barely enough money to buy groceries, let alone medicine. When I handed Clara cash, she refused it. She said she didn't want charity. I told her it wasn't charity. It was simply a stranger helping another stranger get through one difficult afternoon. She accepted. The next morning, I found myself thinking about Elsie's frightened little face while I repaired a broken generator. I told myself I was only worried because I had helped them. But by lunchtime, I drove back to Clara's house with groceries. Elsie was sitting at the kitchen table drawing pictures. When she saw me, her entire face brightened. She showed me a picture of a little house with 3 people standing outside it. One was her mother, and the third was me. I laughed softly and asked why I was in the picture. She shrugged and said she had decided I belonged there. Those words hurt more than I expected. Because for years, I had believed I didn't belong anywhere. Over the next few weeks, I helped Clara repair things around the house. The back steps were unsafe, the kitchen faucet leaked, and the old heater was barely functioning. I fixed what I could without asking for payment. Clara eventually found part-time work at a bakery, and I helped her update her resume and find affordable childcare. But there was something she kept hidden. One afternoon, while I was repairing a loose cabinet hinge, I noticed a photograph tucked behind a stack of papers. It showed Clara standing beside a man who looked strangely familiar. I picked it up. The man was Nathaniel. My brother. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Clara saw my face and immediately understood. She explained that Nathaniel had been her employer years earlier. Clara had worked at a community center where Nathaniel volunteered. He had helped her after Elsie's father abandoned them. He had arranged temporary housing, paid for Elsie's preschool, and made sure Clara had enough groceries during a difficult period. But Clara had never known that Nathaniel and I were brothers. I couldn't breathe. All those years, I had thought my brother had died believing I hated him. Yet while I was holding on to anger, he had been quietly helping a woman and child he barely knew. Clara told me Nathaniel had spoken about me often. He had said that Everett was stubborn, but he has a good heart. He just doesn't know how to forgive himself. That sentence broke something open inside me. I sat down at the kitchen table and cried. Not quietly. Not with dignity. I cried the way I should have cried 3 years earlier, when the hospital called and told me my brother was gone. Clara sat beside me but didn't try to stop me. She simply stayed. For the first time since Nathaniel died, I allowed myself to remember him without anger. I remembered the ridiculous jokes, the arguments over football, the way he used to steal food from my plate, and the summer we built a treehouse that collapsed after 2 days because neither of us understood construction. I realized that my brother had spent his final years trying to become the kind of man who helped people without expecting anything in return. And somehow, his kindness had reached me through a wrong number. But the story wasn't finished. A few days later, Clara received a letter from the landlord. She had been given an eviction date. Her bakery job wasn't enough, and the landlord had already rented another property to someone else. I offered to help her find a place. She refused again. This time, I told her something I had never told anyone. I admitted that I was close to losing my own business. She looked at me with surprise. I explained that I had been helping everyone else because fixing other people's problems made it easier not to face my own. Clara smiled sadly and told me that maybe we were both learning the same lesson. Neither of us had to carry everything alone. So we made a plan. I would keep my repair shop open. Clara would work at the bakery and take an evening bookkeeping course during the week. We would search for a small affordable house where she and Elsie could live. I would help with repairs, and she would help manage the shop's paperwork. It wasn't charity. It was cooperation. Months passed. My repair shop began doing better because Clara discovered I was terrible at keeping financial records. She organized everything, found unnecessary expenses, and helped me advertise online. Business slowly improved. Elsie became a regular presence at the shop, sitting at an old wooden desk doing homework while I worked. She called the place the Fix-It House. One afternoon, she asked me whether I planned to keep fixing things forever. I told her I probably would. She smiled and said that was good because some things were worth fixing even if they looked completely broken. I knew she wasn't talking about machines. A year after that wrong number message, Clara bought the little house she had once feared losing. It wasn't large or beautiful, but it had a small garden, a sunny kitchen, and enough room for Elsie to grow up feeling safe. I stood in the doorway while Clara handed me a key. She told me it wasn't repayment. It was a reminder that sometimes people enter your life by accident and stay because they were meant to. I couldn't answer. I simply hugged her. Then Elsie ran into the room carrying a framed photograph. It was the picture of Nathaniel. She had placed it beside a newer photograph of the three of us. Underneath them was a handwritten sentence. "Some people leave, but their kindness stays." I stared at those words for a long time. That wrong number had not simply introduced me to Clara and Elsie. It had brought me back to my brother. It had taught me that forgiveness isn't always something we give another person. Sometimes forgiveness is the permission we finally give ourselves to stop living inside yesterday. I never found out what happened to the man Clara had originally intended to text. Maybe he eventually answered. Maybe he didn't. But I stopped wondering. Because sometimes life sends the wrong message to the right person. Sometimes a stranger's desperate plea arrives on a day when you are desperately lost yourself. And sometimes, when you reach out to save someone else, you discover that they were sent into your life to save you too. Years later, my repair shop still has that old wooden desk where Elsie used to do her homework. She grew up, went to college, and eventually became a social worker. Clara became the manager of a local community program that helps families facing eviction. And I kept one thing from that first day. The original message. Please come. I have no one else. I keep it framed above my desk. Not because it reminds me of the woman who sent it by mistake, but because it reminds me of the man I almost became before that message arrived. A lonely man. An angry man. A man who believed his best days were behind him. That wrong number taught me otherwise. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you go, tell us in the comments this one thing. Have you ever helped someone unexpectedly and later realized that the person you thought you were helping had actually changed your life too? Your answer might be the exact message of hope someone in our community needs today. Because we spend so much of our lives believing that life is made of perfect plans, correct numbers, carefully chosen roads, and people who arrive exactly when we expect them. But sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin with a mistake. Sometimes the wrong number becomes the right connection. Sometimes a stranger becomes family. And sometimes the message that says, "I have no one else," is really life whispering, "You are not alone either." That was the greatest gift that wrong number ever gave me. It didn't change my phone. It changed my heart.